Well, friends, after such kind remarks, perhaps what I'm going to say would appear to be very petty. It's very difficult to live up to the kind adjectives that have been used for me. But I shall try my best to present my thesis on doctored history, which Ravi Sinha Sahab has prescribed for me as the topic for this lecture. Historical tradition in India is very old. In Sanskrit, from Harsha Charita and Raja Tarangini, and then of course the Persian chronicles and records, and books on administration like Ain Akbari, and then in the colonial period. And these have been studied largely from with some regard to accuracy. Whether it would be the Indo-Persian chroniclers or Bana's Harsha Charita, a biography in praise, some regard was always paid to actual facts. And we can use these texts for reconstructing Indian history of that time. What is happening now is what has been aptly called doctored history. That is history which has no basis practically in facts. And I would therefore immediately begin with the element of race theory, which has been discredited all over the world, but is now the reigning doctrine as far as the official historiography is concerned, as shown, for instance, in the University Grants Commission's syllabus for bachelor's course in history. This is the race theory. When the RSS was formed in 1920s, it was formed as a kind of force for communal riots. But in 1938, Golwalkar decided to write a book which is regarded by the RSS as practically its Bible. We are nationhood defined. In this book, it was stated by Golwalkar later on that he was drawing on the basis of other Hindutva writers, but in a sense, it's a good collection with which to start. In this text, there is a statement of commendation of Adolf Hitler, that Hitler has got the right idea about race, and this is shown by his treatment of Jews. Clearly, he could say it because perhaps it's little known that in 1938, England and France were encouraging Hitler to attack Soviet Russia. And therefore, any praise of Hitler was not going to offend the British. But Hitler had his race theory, the Aryan fixation. And this had been earlier raised, and it had been supposed that Hindus, as Golwalkar himself recognizes, are actually the people who are truly Indians. And the Indian nation should belong to them. Holwerker said that the others could not have any rights, and he was, of course, referring to Muslims. They would not be citizens, they would not have any rights at all. And why were Hindus the real patriotic people of India? Because all their religious places are in India. This is an oft-repeated thing now. It was repeated in the textbooks which were written for the NCERT during the period of Vajpayee regime, 1999 to 2004. The trouble, of course, is that Kailash, with which the list begins, is not in India. It is in the Tibet region of China very firmly. We are not even claiming it. But that apart, if this thesis is accepted, then 99% or perhaps more of the nations of the world would not be nations at all. Because, for instance, if they have Christian majorities, the religious places of Christians are in Palestine only. Or if you are thinking of Catholic Christianity in Rome, only 2 countries. And therefore, if you apply this principle to the world, it is absurd. It would mean that there is no other nation except the Hindu nation in India. इसको देख लीजिए इसे जरा सा अगर गाना तो so but this is repeated all the time, as if Hindus are the only people of the country. But then, of course, you have to go back in history. And the other thing that Hitler left behind was the Aryan theory. Now, as far as linguists are concerned, the term Arya or area applies only to India and Iran, to the set of Indo-European languages of which the earlier texts are the Rig Veda and the Avesta. And in the early Sanskrit texts, you have the word Arya for respectable, honorable, applied in the Dharma Shastra to the first 3 varnas, Brahman, Kshatriya and Vaishya, not Shudras. And also meaning noble, so that Buddhists had their noble truths, Arya truths. And in Iran, in Avesta, the term is area, and the word Iran itself is derived from that. Area Vazev was corresponded to Aryavat, and now Iran is the plural of area. So the country of the respectable people, and that is Iran. So even in this respect, there is nothing particular in India. Iran could have easily claimed as much as we can to be the original Aryas. But what is the charm in being Aryas? If you look at the writings of these NCERT textbooks of the period I was mentioning, now of course we have gone much beyond that in the UGC syllabus. There is extreme annoyance at any suggestion that Aryas came from outside. They spread out from India. Now, for a long time, archaeology had established that all human beings of our species, Homo sapiens sapiens, have come out of Africa. Even the earlier species, main species, Homo erectus, came out of Africa. The archaeological evidence was definitive. It has now been established by genetic evidence also. But this is totally ignored in our textbooks, the NCERT textbooks, and also in the UGC syllabus. India produced the Aryan race, which supposedly civilized the whole world. We owe nothing to Africa. In fact, in our heart of hearts, we would deny that we came from Africa. So you can see in the UGC syllabus, there is something about prehistory, but never of human migration out of Africa. And then, of course, this Aryan fixture. Aryans was produced in India. Now, linguistics had long established that what is called the Aryan set of Indo-European languages arising out of Sanskrit and Western Iranian was a late version of the Indo-European language. Proto-Indo-European, they were farthest practically from Proto-Indo-European. And then there came the archaeological evidence, the horse evidence, which had made it practically centered. And that as far as communities which had horses, they migrated from the Kazakhstan, Russian steppes into southern parts of Central Asia, then across Afghanistan into Iran and India. You can trace it through horse bones. You can trace it through depictions of horses. That was practically established 20 years ago. This has been now reinforced by genetic evidence, which places this migration, notably of males, in around between 2000 and 1500 BC, which was also the chronology established by archaeology. Now, what is the harm in Indo-Aryans speaking Indo-European languages of the late stage, coming from northern areas of Central Asia into India? Of course, nothing. Any part of the world is like any other part. But to the doctors of history, RSS doctors of history, this is terrible. They go on talking about the myth of Aryan invasion. Nobody is saying that Aryans were a state which actually invaded India. Nobody is saying that. We are talking of migrations. We are talking of tribes, which of course, whose existence is attested by the Rig Veda, hymns of the Rig Veda. And their movement. And we are talking about Dravidian influence, which comes into Indo-Aryan languages in India, but is absent in Iran. Retroflexion, which comes from the oral sound, for instance, which comes from Proto-Dravidian, as would be normal if an Indo-European language migrates into India. It would certainly have influence of other languages already there. So the linguistic study is totally eschewed. There is a tirade against Dravidian influences, which is very curious because Dravidians are of course also Indians. And if there is any Dravidian influence in the Rig Veda, what is the harm? But thus you can see this absolute racist ideology is at work when you come to the Indus civilization. The Indus civilization is a cause of much disturbance for the RSS doctors of history, because it had towns, it had a written script, and although, as our Prime Minister may say, that we had plastic surgery because we put elephant head on Lord Ganesha thousands and thousands of years ago, but the fact remains that we did not know writing until practically Ashokan edicts. And if earlier writing is there, it is in southern India and Sri Lanka. So, in the Dravidian land. And therefore, it is very troublesome that the Indus civilization should have ideographs and pictographs. And we can't read it, and certainly it's not Sanskrit. Now, it has been stressed so many times that the seals show, because of the deities there, that they can't be Vedic deities. They are zoomorphic, not anthropomorphic. That is to say, they are based on animal forms. They are not based on human forms. The Shiv seal is also not at all Shiv, because the animals shown are not the cattle but wild animals. And therefore, it has long been held by every serious archaeologist that the Indus civilization is pre-Aryan. And while there is no possible link discovered between Indus pictographs and Sanskrit, there are two very important links with Proto-Dravidian: the fish sign and the arrow sign. Fish in Proto-Dravidian refers to both fish and stars and has other meanings also. And that will explain the very frequent way in which fish sign appears in Indus civilization. The arrow sign is also, its position in the text suits the position worked out for it in Dravidian and Proto-Dravidian languages and in Proto-Dravidian. So these two pieces of evidence are very important. Why should we be unhappy? If Indus civilization is Dravidian, I can't understand. Dravidians are not Iranians, they are not Afghans, they are not Americans, they are South Indians. So why should we worry? But this is a very central issue in the doctored history of India, which the RSS produced. What they do is to try to establish a fantastic chronology. Vyakhyanmala, the late RSS archaeologist, dated Rig Veda in 8000 BC. Rig Veda shows agriculture, wheat cultivation, barley cultivation, plough, horse domestication. All were absent in 8000 BC. Totally absent. How Rig Veda could belong to that time? And then even B.B. Lal, who had been Director General of the Archaeological Survey, said that Shatapatha Brahmana was composed in 4500 BC with some fantastic interpretation of astronomical data. And therefore Rig Veda would be 4000 years earlier. So when archaeologists of that stature are talking about these fantasies, in 4500 BC, where he put the Brahmana text, which is in post-Vedic text, cotton was not present, horses were not present, and of course, even in agriculture, that the most wheat and barley were available. How can Brahmanas belong to that time, which are texts that are post-Vedic? So there is a reconstruction of history in which the attempt is made that so that the Rig Veda is put well before the Indus civilization. Historical and archaeological evidence doesn't matter. It's just declaration. And then, of course, nomenclature is very important. The archaeological survey from Wheeler's time began to call Indus civilization, the popular name, as Harappan, on the ground that Harappa was the first site which was excavated. Now, Harappa has this difficulty that it has gone to Pakistan. Moreover, it is not in the Punjab. And the final difficulty is that it is not on the Saraswati. So, if we could name the Indus civilization Saraswati civilization, then we will both Aryanize and Hinduize Indus civilization. Why Hinduize? Because Saraswati is, of course, the sacred river. In fact, the river goddess in the Rig Veda. There are, of course, minor difficulties. Saraswati, the sacred Saraswati, passed through Thanes or Thaneshwar. And it's a very small stream and used to run dry around the place which is now called Sirsa, or from Saraswati. And therefore it is very difficult to argue that Saraswati would be such an important river that the Rig Veda addresses it in such fashion. Of course, the Rig Veda hymns of Saraswati are for the river goddess. That is a small point forgotten. It is not for this river. So the river goddess naturally has large rivers and so forth. So this minor point, this crucial point is of course totally ignored. And by naming Indus civilization, Saraswati, Sindhu civilization, mind you, Sindhu also the Sanskrit form. They are now trying to Aryanize the Indus civilization. Now clearly, this puts history upside down because there are no horses, no evidence of horse in the Indus civilization. None at all. And Rig Veda, as one can see, shows us a community in which horses were very important. Accordingly, this puts history upside down. And one can only say that this kind of invention cannot be acceptable to any serious historian. I would then move on to their treatment of the caste system. Of course, for reasons of their own, Ambedkar is everywhere now. They think Ambedkar is their answer to Gandhi. But what about their own portrayal of the caste system? You will be surprised that in the UGC syllabus, the caste system is regarded as a medieval institution. When Muslims came, Hindus had to divide themselves among castes. It's never mentioned in ancient India. The only mention is very curious. Origins of the Rajputs. Well, of course, Rajputs are a caste. How can you deny that? So in their origin, you are very much interested, how the Rajput caste arose in late ancient times, after 600 AD, Rajaputras. But as far as the caste system is concerned, that's totally avoided. Of course, it has not come to this that they praise the caste system, but they simply look away from the caste system. And actually, the position of the caste system, the spread of the caste system from the Middle Gangetic Basin into the Mauryan Empire, and then towards South India, this is a very interesting theme for historians. How caste system spread. When Alexander came to conquer what is now Pakistan, Indus Basin, his historians, his chroniclers found Brahmins there, but they didn't find any caste system. Not at all. And clearly, by a close study of inscriptions and so forth, it can be seen how caste system moved from particular region, beginning with Bihar and eastern UP, then to the remainder part of the country. It's a very interesting theme for historians. But all this is anathema to the framers of the UGC syllabus or the writers of the RSS type textbooks. They can't explain the caste system, and therefore they practically omit it. To them, I mean, their hostility to the late Ramcharan Sharma, Professor Ramcharan Sharma, was owed to this, that he wrote a whole book on the Shudras and how they were ill-treated. Perhaps a text on Chandalas would even portray greater ill-treatment. It's a very interesting topic, how spread of agriculture into forest territories brought gathering tribes into the post-Vedic society, and how they were then turned into untouchables. This is a very interesting topic. Another interesting topic, by the way, is religion. Dharma means morality, both to Buddhists and to the Brahmins. But actually, they had no name for a religion. And when Ashoka in his, say, Tolerance Edict, Talk Edict 12, talks about religious sects, he uses the curious word Pashanda, which is Hindi Pakhand, fraudulent, with the Brahmins used for Buddhists and the Buddhists used for Brahmins. So he can't find a word for religion, and therefore he uses the word that they were using for each other, Pashanda, because a word for religion is not available. What I'm saying is that these are very interesting issues. Why, for instance, Ashoka doesn't refer to the caste system at all, which are worth discussing, but in the kind of doctored versions, all these become irrelevant. Indeed, Ashoka is increasingly becoming irrelevant for them. In the UGC syllabus, he's just Ashoka. Another interesting thing about them is that they are very that they don't like the Greek invasion. And therefore, when they formed the Indian History and Culture Society around 1978, so they first issued a book, Bias in Indian Historiography. And in this book, bias in Indian historiography, there are new discoveries. One of them is that actually Alexander did not defeat Porus. Porus defeated Alexander. B.N. Puri, Professor B.N. Puri of Lucknow University, whom I thought was a serious historian, is the author of this article. Another historian said that the Rig Veda must be much before 2200 BC because the Saraswati dried up in 2200 BC. He, of course, has to give the evidence. He said that some person lecturing in the presence of Professor Rumala Thapar gave this date, but Professor Rumala Thapar did not object. I'm very sorry that Professor Rumala Thapar got bored and didn't object, and so this fantastic date of 2200 BC must therefore be accepted, according to K.C. Verma in this. Of course, what they mean is that if Saraswati died up in 2200 BC, then Rig Veda must be much earlier. And of course, how it fits in with Indus civilization, I don't know. But they can date the Indus civilization whatever they like. Therefore, the kind of history, ancient Indian history that they have written and they seek to write is fantastic. When you come to medieval India, then the type of history that RSS people are trying to write dovetails into the previous controversies in which both Muslim communal historians and Hindu communal historians had their positions. I will first come to Muslim historians, Ishaq Hussain Qurashi and others. There is a modern view of Islam that Islam is an egalitarian creed. There is a historical view of Islam that equality is limited, slavery was permitted, concubinage was permitted, was in fact permitted. Great Muslim theologians had slaves, even Sufis had slaves. Therefore, to say that Islam is an egalitarian religion in its law is unacceptable. But historians like Ishaq Qurashi, Professor K. Nizami of Aligarh, so on, wrote as if Muslims came here to spread equality all over. They did not. They accepted the caste system. Within, of course, Islam, it was difficult to accept it, but they used the caste system. And I am arguing all the time, I have argued that the caste system did not benefit simply the Brahmins and the higher caste. It benefited any government, any state, any exploiting class that controlled land, whether they were Muslims or the colonial power. Because what the caste system did was that it created a large landless proletariat, untouchables. And it divided the peasantry. And both these things were very important for any power, the state power. Therefore, caste system enriched the ancient Indian rulers, it enriched the sultans, it also benefited the colonial power. I mean, there are many statements in the colonial days in which British officers say that we should not disturb the caste system because otherwise peasants would not get labor at a particular time. And then, of course, taxes won't be paid. So clearly, the caste system was as useful for sultans as it was for the earlier rulers. And to say that Islam was an egalitarian creed is totally unhistorical. I did not find the word masabat or equality in any of the religious texts that have come down to me, that I have studied from the Sultanate and Mughal period. This is a totally modern idea imposed on Muslim theology. But at the same time, to regard it as foreign rule, as now, and even in the British days, was the custom of some communal historians, is absurd. Because foreign rule means that you are ruling on behalf of some foreign country. But there was no foreign country to which the sultans of Delhi or the Mughal emperors conveyed their wealth. Whatever they got, they spent in this country. They were not born outside. After Humayun, no Mughal emperor was born outside India. They didn't hold any area outside India, and one must remember that Afghanistan was at that time, Kabul and Kandahar were regarded as the frontier stations of India. They didn't have the Durand line at that time. So to call it foreign rule, as RSS people do, and Mahasabhite people do, and Mr. Modi does, whose knowledge of history is as good as his knowledge of mythology, that Indian has been under foreign rule for 1200 years is absurd. And this is the reason why whenever one talks of the national movement, they begin to say that, of course, earlier also there was resistance, and talk about Maharana Pratap as if he was a member of the Bharatiya Janata Party. So these are total absurdities. Earlier ancient Indian rulers were Kshatriyas. Most rulers, perhaps because of the cavalry and important developments in cavalry like stirrup and iron shoe and so forth, and then artillery. Most rulers were Muslims until the 18th century. But they were not foreigners. And the absurdity comes to this extent that Akbar, even Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan history and culture of the Indian people, patronized by K.M. Munshi and edited by R.C. Majumdar, whom as a historian I greatly respect, but who was certainly a member of the Hindu Mahasabha. It is to say that they were foreigners or Muslims are foreigners, as Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan series sometimes implied, as I say, absurd. But R.C. Majumdar and others did not go so far as our RSS people go. For example, it looks very bad to the RSS that should be any cultural attainments left by Muslim rulers. And therefore, P.N. Oak and others in 1960s started writing articles that every Mughal building was actually constructed by Hindus. Whether it is the Red Fort, whether it is the Taj Mahal that was Man Singh's palace, or whether it is the any other great building. He had started an institute called Institute for Rewriting Indian History, and his articles were published in Organizer, the RSS organ. which led R.C. Majumdar to break all connections with the organizer because he said that this is madness and I can't actually actually have any relation with it. I won't write any article for you. To which organizer answered that this was these were reasonable articles and they will go on publishing P and Oakes pieces. So to actually say that there were no cultural developments in medieval period, the buildings were not constructed by the rulers, and so on. And to popularize this is almost madness. Finally, but I hope I have time for taking the doctoring of modern Indian history. As far as modern Indian history is concerned, one can take Hari Om's Modern India, which was published under Vajpayee regime by the NCRT. Now, what annoys the RSS writers is that credit for Renaissance should be given to Ram Mohan Roy, Keshav Chandra Sen, Justice Ranade, or Sayyid Ahmad Khan, who promoted English education. And in case of Ram Mohan Roy, the man was superb. I mean, talking in 1831 of making a permanent settlement with the peasants rather than with the zamindar, I just can't imagine the greatness and the vision of the man. All these are expelled from the book. We don't have mention of Ram Mohan Roy because Ram Mohan Roy was a monotheist, Muvahid as he called himself, equally at home in Persian and Arabic as in English. And Keshav Chandra Sen, a major reformer, social reformer, who has not been given, I'm afraid, the credit he deserves. Talking about women's equality at that time and so on. I mean, the man he's also thrown out of the book. Justice Ranade also, although he was a moderate reformer, but he's not there. Which reformer is there? Dayanand Saraswati. What does Dayanand Saraswati say about women's rights to inheritance? Bankim Chandra Chatterjee. They forget Tagore's criticism of Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, that he's introducing religion into every. Swami Vivekanand, again a religious figure, and Aurobindo Ghosh, how he can be called a reformer? A supporter of violent means, but then a fugitive in bondage. What has he contributed to the reform movement? These are the heroes. And what is the real movement is not the national movement, the so-called cultural nationalism. The English didn't bother about your cultural nationalism, which RSS pursued without entering into a single conflict with the British government. When they said change your uniform, they changed it. When you said don't parade, they didn't parade. All their abuses were towards Gandhiji and the Muslims. What part did they play in the national movement or cultural, or what they call cultural nationalism? Moreover, there is a perverse use of Ambedkar. Ambedkar's contribution is great insofar as he led the movement for the so-called outcasts, the depressed classes. But as far as the national movement is concerned, he can't really be compared with the national leaders. And to omit Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru from the national movement, so much so that Hari Om does not describe, although he comes into early period, early 50s, he does not describe Gandhiji's assassination. He does not mention it, as if it was not an event worth recording. And here, I would like to say that in doctored history, they have not only tried to totally run down national figures, those who really brought us independence, Gandhiji above all, Jawaharlal Nehru, and they praise Patel, but they don't ever cite, quote, Patel's criticisms of the RSS, censures of the RSS. And just to pit Patel against Nehru is absurd. Therefore, one of the most vicious and mischievous things they are doing is to totally misrepresent the national movement. Then finally, I would like to close with their doctoring of post-independence history, which I think is also throughout what they are doing is dangerous, but this is extremely dangerous. I was 16 when India became independent. I was working on behalf of the Communist Party in the election of 1952 in a place like Hathras. That election, among other things, was fought on whether there should be a reform in Hindu law to give women their rights. That was one of the issues. The Jansangh, the RSS formed body, the Ram Rajya Parishad, and the Hindu Mahasabha formed a front to oppose the reform of the Hindu code. They were badly defeated. I saw where I was, of course, few people were coming to us, the Communist Party, but no one was going to them. No one was going to the Jansangh and that crowd. And women were saying, we haven't got anything, but our daughters will get something if the Hindu code comes. That is totally washed off in national memory now, going to the doctored history that RSS presented. In 1955 and 56, the Hindu code came, which totally overthrew 2000 years of Dhamshastra. And 50 years later, it was again under a Congress government that women got totally equal rights under that code. All the minor distinctions still left were obliterated, but that under Congress government. To say that nothing happened after independence, as Modi and Shah go on uttering, is absurd. The land to the peasant. From 1946, provincial governments, legislatures began to pass or present to zamindari abolition. And Kashmir was perhaps the most radical that came under Sheikh Abdullah, whom these RSS people denounce. But if peasants got land in Kashmir and Jammu and Kashmir, this was Sheikh Abdullah. And in Uttar Pradesh and all provinces and then states, peasants got land, zamindari was abolished. Was it nothing? Then subsequently land ceilings, so that depressed castes also got land. Was it nothing? Then in Nehru's own time, nationalization of insurance companies, which gave great relief to ordinary people because then insurance became safe. Bank nationalization later. All were important elements in building a public sector and in industrializing India. Even G.D. Birla supported the second five-year plan because he said that's the only way to industrialize India. Was it nothing? And as has been shown by important economists, in the latter half of the 20th century, the per capita consumption of food grew and it has been falling afterward. Was it nothing? So the total misrepresentation of post-independence India is a very important part of the doctrine of Indian history. It should be resisted. What happened should be fairly and correctly described. You can't eliminate great figures from Indian history and supplant them by manufactured ones. And you can't just ignore great events, either the civil code or the zamindari abolition or the land ceilings, so land distribution. Those were, and the building of the public sector and the industrialization of India. These were immense achievements which RSS and Shah and Modi are trying to hide, but which it is the responsibility of historians to convey to the Indian people. Thank you. आवाज नहीं आ रही है.
Please, I request Raviji to say a few words. Please.
Thank you, Subhash, and thank you so much, Irfan Sahib. Thank you so much for to this platform, accepting our request to speak, or direct and illuminating, speech. Subhash calls me from NSI, get an additional opportunity to express our gratitude to speakers. But I use this opportunity to think of the first question, and there are many stalwarts in the audience. I think there will be good discussion on this. Just to start, I will ask the following. As these doctors, who, as you have described, painted Aryans only as indigenous and later leaders, how they that our greatness, the Aryan greatness, was despoiled by the invaders who came later. So these doctors of history, do they also have some explanation of if our so great, we are so great, include the indigenous people, how come we kept on getting defeated? How come we, if they blame the invaders, first of all, the Muslim invaders. How do these doctors explain the defeat of a whole civilization if they consider this civilization as only ancient and only Aryan? So the Muslims and then the British colonialism and so on, what they call these 1200 years of Gulami, how did it come upon us? How do they doctor this explanation?
You're mute, Professor. You're mute. We are not able to hear you.
Can I be heard now?
Yeah.
Well, the thing is that reason doesn't count with doctors of history. If reason were to count, then first of all, they wouldn't say that Aryan race is important. All humanity is the same. There's nothing in genetics which shows that the Aryans are wiser than others. As far as their defeats are concerned, they of course would attribute it to the fierceness of the Turks, the inhumanity of the Turks, and so on. They used to say, of course, that Sati came because of the Muslims in order to protect women. But actually, Sati only destroyed widows. So that was also absurd because if the Muslims really wanted to seize women, they could have seized wives. But this was the normal case. But now it has been, of course, found, and it was known at that time from ancient Indian inscriptions that Sati is much older than Indian Islam, Muslim invasions, Arab invasions. The second charge is, of course, that Muslims destroyed temples, which is partly true. But on the other hand, it must be remembered that Muhammad bin Qasim, the first invader, was asked by Hajjaj bin Yusuf to treat Indians, that meant Hindus, as the Parsis were treated in Iran, that is to not touch their temples. And the great Sun Temple of Multan continued to function under the Arabs. It was destroyed much later, just before the time of Mahmud Abbas. So many of the statements they make that when Muslims came, they destroyed temples, in general are not correct. Muslims did destroy some temples, but to say that they destroyed all temples and that particularly Arabs, when they invaded, did so. Because the Arabs were already had a large non-Muslim population in Iran, and they knew how to manage, because if they had begun to destroy Parsi temples, then there would have been a revolt there. And the same with Sindh. So they were not such fools as to provoke unnecessary rebellions. But I don't think it is worthwhile arguing with the RSS history doctors.
I will request back Comrade Bhargav to join the discussion. Bhargav, please.
Yeah. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
I would like to bring some of the remarks and questions which are available in the chat box here. Maybe I'll take one of them and I'll bring it to your notice. One question came like, please comment on the Hindutva brigade eulogizing Subhash Chandra Bose and Bhagat Singh and Raja Mahendra Pratap, etc. these days. So that's one comment I saw it in chat box.
Well, I think their general principle is to try to shift attention from Gandhiji and Jawaharlal Nehru and other national leaders. And so to shift to Ambedkar, for example, or to shift to Subhash Chandra Bose or Bhagat Singh. While praising them, they don't bring out what they said. Subhash Bose, in organizing Azad Hind Fauj, put equal weight to Hindi and Urdu. Would they do that? His national anthem was Sare Jahan Se Achha Hindustan Hamara. Would they sing it? Similarly, as far as Bhagat Singh is concerned, Bhagat Singh believed in Marxism, and he also said that he had great respect for national leaders, particularly Jawaharlal Nehru. He named him. When he threw a bomb, he said, "How could I hurt Indian leaders, including Jinnah?" Would they say that? So clearly, their shift to Subhas Bose or Bhagat Singh or Ambedkar is purely in order to run down Jawaharlal Nehru and Gandhi. That's all. Although, for instance, they say that Gandhi did not defend Bhagat Singh. Now it's a chance that when Gandhiji was assassinated, Irwin spoke on BBC, and I heard that broadcast. And Lord Irwin said that in those negotiations, Gandhiji brought up Bhagat Singh's case again and again, don't execute him, and his comrades. And Irwin said that that is no part of our agreement, of the issues that we are debating. So when everything was over, Gandhi went out and then came back again and said, outside that agreement, I'm begging you to forgive Bhagat Singh and his comrades, not to execute. Please. And Irwin said, I told him that is just not possible. And after some argument, he went away very crestfallen. Now, this is what I've heard Irwin saying. And they go on repeating the total falsehood that Gandhi entered into Irwin agreement sacrificing Bhagat Singh. That's a total lie. So they are building up these lies and falsehoods to lower the stature of people like Gandhi.
We have with us Professor Tanika Sarkar in the discussion. I would request her to join the discussion. Professor Tanika Sarkar. Tanika ji, please.
Well, I think she could answer her questions much better than I ever could.
Yeah. So that's why I asked her to join the discussion. Sir, please. Tanika ji. Hello. She's new, right? Professor Kumar Ketkar Saab is also with us. So please, Kumar Ketkar ji, are you able to hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, but I can't. I think you can't see me. My camera is off, I think.
Please.
Okay. No, my rather rhetorical question is, what does Sri Irfan Habib think of Ramchandra Guha's revisionist history, in which he places Ambedkar even greater than Nehru, and tries to show that actually Ambedkar has been undermined by the post-independence leadership and the post-independence writers, and he is trying to correct it. There was a CNN poll in which a question was asked, who do you think is greater, Ambedkar or Nehru? And he categorically said Ambedkar. So I don't understand this kind of running down somebody and putting up somebody as an internal historical politics that is being played among the historians. How does one deal with the historians playing politics like this? What do you think of Ramchandra Guha's observations?
Well, I have great respect for Professor Ramchandra Guha as a historian, but that doesn't mean that I agree with him. There were two questions in India. One was the inequity of the caste system. and the other was the freedom of the country. So the two areas were different. Ambedkar as social reformer, yes. He stood up for the depressed class, for the so-called untouchables. And this is certainly very praiseworthy. But as far as the national movement is concerned, the freedom of the country, that is a totally different department. And the fact remains that for a long time, Ambedkar felt that it was from the British government that concessions would come. They didn't. The British government did not ever outlaw untouchability. Never. I mean, the kinds of laws that were passed in the 50s could never be conceived under British government against untouchability. So clearly, the independence of India was necessary for the liberation of the depressed class. A minor point that I should mention is that the Pune Pact is denounced by many as if the earlier decision by the government of Britain was a kind of Magna Carta. But actually by the Pune Pact, the scheduled caste representation was doubled, more than doubled in the provincial assemblies and provided for in the central assembly. So the denunciation of the Pune Pact is also uncalled for. That greatly increased scheduled caste representation. Through joint electorates, yes, but for 10 years, there would be a separate electorate also under that pact. So I don't agree that by the Pune Pact, there was the depressed caste came to harm and so on. In fact, their representation increased, was doubled, and they received representation in Central Assembly, which was not granted under the British Prime Minister's award.
I would like to call a senior journalist and social activist from Andhra Pradesh is here, Khan Yazdani. I want him to intervene and have his remarks. You are in.
Yes. Thank you, Bharava, for giving me this opportunity. I am so delighted hearing the Irfan Habib sir. It is it is every time a treaty for the people like us. There is no question, sir. Your elaboration on the Pune Pact just seems is right. Ambedkar depended more on the Britishers to solve the problem. He has given more priority to the schedule issue than the freedom struggle at that time. But I think Ambedkar had done services to the labor section also as a member of the Labor Commission at the Viceroy. Now, would you please elaborate on the role of the Ambedkar or contribution of the Ambedkar for the labor section of this country, please?
Well, I'm really not an expert on Ambedkar's life, but I can say that when he was a member of the Viceroy's Council during World War II, there was no particular advance made by the depressed class. I mean, one could have expected something to be done to remove untouchability and so on. Everything came after independence. For instance, I'll give you one example. Sweepers received much lower pay than pains. One of the early orders of the government after freedom were that they would be the pay would be equal, the same. I mean, independence was necessary for the liberation of the oppressed class. How can it be regarded as secondary?
Okay, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
Of course, the constitution that was drafted, and Ambedkar made his contribution there in the constitution. But again, that could only come, the whole question of constitution would come after you had independence.
Should I, Subhash, should I, do you want to invite anybody, or should I go in the chat, please?
Chat box, please take a look.
Yeah. There is a question in the chat box, sir. It's posed by a person called Pani. I'm going to read it. The concept and its understanding of Varna is an organic model in the native worldview of a particular people in this country, whereas the concept and its understanding of caste is a linear model coming from a different worldview foreign to this country, as the word caste comes from a casta of Portuguese origin. What's the rationale behind using it to explain or write about a native system of social stratification?
Well, I think caste encompasses two terms, Varna and Jati, and is therefore a convenient word now. If you are trying to stick to original terminology, Dharmashastra terminology, then of course you can say Varna and Jati. And Jati was the endogamous communities within the larger caste. So you are welcome to use either terms. Caste is, as I say, a useful term because it encompasses both Varna and Jati. Whereas if you use Varna, then Jati gets uncovered, remains uncovered.
Professor Vijay Chandru is here with us. Vijay, please, you would like to join the discussion, please.
Oh, thank you, Subhash. Thank you, Professor Habib, for the extraordinary presentation and discussion. I just have a small comment. I think this recent archaeological finding in Keeladi in Tamil Nadu, has also some interesting interpretations of our ancient history. I wonder, what you would see in that. The findings are still coming out, of course, but.
No, I'm afraid I've not studied the findings, but could you tell me what they are?
So it seems to show that somewhere between 300 and 600 BC, they were actually a fairly advanced civilization that has been actually uncovered in Tamil Nadu. This was actually the archaeological finding itself had to go through a lot of legal processes because there was some resistance to, it's clear that the Stalin government is really sort of standing by the findings there. So it has been politicized a little bit, but I think.
Yes, but I've not studied it, but earlier I had studied the reports on writings, Brahmi inscriptions on pottery, which suggests first is they came from Sri Lanka, where the dates were before, earlier to Ashoka's time, 4th century and even 5th century in Sri Lanka, and then the same dates were also found in Tamil Nadu inscriptions.
That's right. Yeah, I think that's one of the findings that has come out of Keeladi.
But they were previously discovered also. I'm talking about earlier finds, perhaps finds from this site. I don't remember the names. You know that in the Tamil Brahmi inscriptions, the short vowel sounds are not given. Whereas in Ashokan Brahmi, the short vowel sounds are also provided for, which Devanagari inherits. This seems to suggest otherwise also an earlier script.
Right.
So that this is a very interesting thing, that a script should come based on, ultimately on Aramaic. It should come to Sri Lanka and Tamil Nadu and then move on to Mughal, where it is finally given the form with short vowel forms that ultimately leads to Devanagari script today.
Right.
Of course, these things are of great interest, and particularly the movement through South India and Sri Lanka. I mean, one thought that script had gone from North India to South India and Sri Lanka, but now it seems that it's a reverse. That's also one of the things that won't fit in the doctored history of the BJP, where there is a curious anti-Dravidian element, which I have not been able to explain why, but they just can't hear of Proto-Dravidian or Dravidian.
Right. No, I think that was precisely the issue. That's why I raised the question. Right. Thank you.
Bhargav, you are mute. You are mute.
Okay. Sorry. Sir, I would like to relay another question, a small question and a remark from Anant Goswami, Mr. Anant Goswami. Sir, where would you place the question of Muslim communalism in India today? As most here would agree, we live in a Hindu fascist state, though the precise nature and extent of today's fascism can certainly be debated. In such a context, is it any more relevant to focus on eschewing both Hindu and Muslim communalism and calling for Hindu-Muslim unity? Not that these slogans have no element of truth, but they certainly disguise the real nature of social political relations today, especially considering Muslims have faced a long history of exclusion and persecution in independent India, even during its quote-unquote secular phase. As an imperfect analogy, it would certainly be absurd to give the slogan of eschewing both Brahmin and Dalit castes in response to casteism within a society.
You see, of course, it's a question when partition occurred and there were such massacres on both sides. They left their mark. But I would still argue that conditions were different from what they are today under the Congress regimes. There's one thing of discrimination in practice, and there's one thing in official glorification of discrimination, which you are today finding, that any exclusion of Muslims is from offices, from service, and so forth, is regarded as a great national achievement. I mean, that kind of statement, 80% against 20%, that you can't just imagine that any Congress leader would have made in 50s or 60s or 70s. You just can't imagine. So when it's this situation, then clearly you can't compare it with what went earlier. Just there is no comparison.
There is Subhash, do you want to invite anybody?
Please go ahead, Bhargav, please.
Yeah. There is another query from one Mr. Aishman Kashyap. The history and tackling of the Northeast question presents a dilemma as the Kamarupa gets a mention in ancient history. And now Hindutva ideologues would use Mahabharata to paint the Northeast in orange, while the colonial history would say that addition of these areas, Northeast, as a historical accident. How does one make out of Northeast?
You see, Kamarupa is mentioned, comes into the picture as far as inscriptions are concerned from about 6th century AD, and you have the kingdom, Kamarupa kingdom, which the ruler was an ally of Harsha, and Yuan Chang also describes him. So clearly, it happens that different regions, history is light, falls on different regions differently in different periods. But one can't actually construct a history when no record exists. It is said by BJP enthusiasts that Mughal historians have not paid attention to Ahom kingdom, but they forget that the most extensive descriptions of the Ahom kingdom are in Persian, in Alamgir Nama and in Fateh Abriya. So, if you want to know what the economy of Assam was at that time, in 17th century, you have to go to these texts. Ahom chronicles are later. And of course, Ahom chronicles only describe mainly dynastic history. They don't describe what the Mughal chronicles do, products and geography and so forth. So, this objection that Assam history is constructed on the basis of 2 Persian texts is actually uncalled for. This is what RSS people are saying, that they would like to reconstruct an independent history of the Ahom dynasty. How they would reconstruct it, and when no earlier chronicles exist, I can't imagine.
We are with us Professor Dolores from Canada. He has joined. If you would like to join the discussion, I will look it, please.
Thank you, Subhash. I just saw your note in chat and I was responding to say that thank you for the invitation, but really I have nothing to add. I mean, Professor Habib has done such a, as people have mentioned, panoramic job. And as he was speaking, I kept thinking, because in my college here in Montreal, I teach a humanities course called Beyond Bollywood. And I spend a lot of time on historiography and the importance of historiography from the ancient period till today. So as you were speaking, Professor Habib, I was just thinking, yes, you know, and I was just very happy to know that even though I'm not always reading the most current literature, I've been able somehow to deliver to the students these critical views of history and get them to question the ideological dimensions of history. Also living here where we are in Quebec, in Canada, where we have a government that denies systemic racism and has passed a law that says people who wear religious symbols cannot be teachers, etc. It becomes very prescient for my students here to learn about what is going on in India as well. So just thank you very much. And thank you, Subhash, for your generosity.
There is another query, sir. There are actually many more, and it depends. One is from Kannan Sinivasan. It seems to be a continuation to the question posed by Mr. Vijay Chandru. His question is follows like this. Might there be a coherent continuity between Harappan civilization, as we know it from archaeology, DNA, and Mesopotamian trade, and the Vaigai excavations that were suspended by Archaeological Survey of India, then restarted after Madras High Court order, thereafter the Sangam civilization?
Well, I'm afraid I'm not well up on the Sangam civilization. I would doubt it. Because there is one thing as far as connection of Dravidian or Proto-Dravidian language with Indus civilization is concerned. But the area of Indus civilization is so far from South India that it is unlikely that there would be a direct connection. In South India, there would be independent development. The fact that Indus civilization script could be Proto-Dravidian doesn't mean that the population of the Indus civilization then shifted to South India. Languages shift, not necessarily population. And it is possible that at that time both the Indus Basin and South India, people in South India were speaking Proto-Dravidian dialects without a direct contact with each other.
This is not actually my
Please.
this is not actually my theory. It was because it's not an area of my knowledge. It's just that it was written about and suggested and argued in recent discussion about the excavation, but I have not heard it argued or read it argued in any peer-reviewed journal. So because I'm just relying on the reports in the Hindu newspaper, which I read sitting here in New York. So that's why I asked the question. So it's not an academic view that I've heard.
1941 has raised his hand from the audience. Can you please unmute yourself and raise your question? 1941. I don't know his name. RMX 1941. He had raised his hand. No, he's not. Okay. Yeah. We have Ruprekha Verma ji also with us. Would like to add? Ruprekha ji, आप बोलना चाहेंगी कुछ? है नहीं. ये अब लोग प्रोफेसर साहब, for how much time you can continue the discussion? It's fine with you? It's fine with you?
Yes,
please.
it's all right with me.
Please.
Can I, as questions are coming, as other people are thinking of comments, can I get a second chance and interject one small question?
Please.
Similar question has come on chat box also, I think from Alok Tandon, if I'm not wrong. One wonders that this doctored history, these doctors of history, why do they have much more people of India now than they had 60 or even 50 years ago? As democracy and elections and more political competition is a reason, one would expect that people have more say through elections. So let us say that if electoral democracy has become more vigorous, then these doctors of then they begin to have more traction, whereas when India was poorer and less educated, these doctors have as much traction. So what has happened last 50 years? Was I? Yeah.
Would you like me to respond?
Yeah, please go ahead. Please respond.
Well, I think, you see, it's not that literacy necessarily makes people more reasonable. Literacy might lead to totally new superstitions if they are spread. And today, this is possible because you have so many TV stations and other methods of propaganda which are based on money. If you have money, you can do it. So certainly money power becomes very important. This was not the case immediately after independence. Most of the ideas were conveyed through speech, not through TV channels and so on. They didn't exist. And therefore, the fact that Congress had a large number of people who had worked among the poor, who had lived among the poor, that went on counting for quite some time. And the effect of the national movement, the effect of Gandhi's ideas as conveyed by Congress workers, who until 60s were those who had, many of them who had gone to prison and lived like ordinary people. So when that generation passed and more TV and other channels came which money power controls, then you have a situation totally different today. Money power commands votes in a manner that was not possible in 50s and 60s and 70s.
Joya Roy has raised her hand. Joya, please join. Please ask your question. Please.
I put my question in the chat box. Can you hear me?
I'm able to hear you.
Okay. I put my question in the chat box because Kamarup was mentioned and Huan Sang's, he stayed there for quite a while. So my question was about the Ahoms. Is there enough study done on their actual origins? Because I was reading about Tibet and I heard it's only in the 14th century when the Kossuth Mongols overran China and Tibet that these Ahoms were displaced from there and they went into Thailand. There's still a place in the Brahmaputra Valley right near the border, I think, of Burma, where it's called Thai something, which is said to be their original place of refuge. And then they enter the Brahmaputra Valley. And why it's significant to me is because they spearheaded the CAA and all those concentration camps they've made. So is there anything about the Ahom, the origin of the Ahoms?
Well, I'm not an expert on that, but I always thought that there are some words in Assamese which has come through Thai language. And although Ahoms called themselves Ahom, they now tend to call themselves Thai Ahom, as if their relationship is with Thailand. I haven't any recollection of any connection with the Mongols who governed China in the 14th century and were expelled from there in 1360s. So clearly they are not involved in this question. There were no Mongols in the 15th century in China, from Coincidence. So it's the relationship with Thailand that is important. It is true that in the Persian chronicles, it is said that the home court was very different from the Rajput courts that the Mughals were familiar with. Their princesses and queens were more free, and so forth. So again, about the home court and others, these details are available in the Persian sources, two major Persian works, Alamgir Nama, the chronicle of the first 10 years of Aurangzeb's reign, and Fatih-i-Briya, the Assam campaign of Mir Jumla. And as is their custom, they describe the economic products and tribes, and also Nagas, whom they describe as Nanga, as a forest cross. I think it is for the first time that Nagas enter historical record.
What I meant was they really basically they're of Chinese origin. So it's ironic that they should be.
No, but I have not heard that there are any Chinese words in Assamese. What I have read is that there are Thai words, and therefore these people who claim to be descendants of a home call themselves now Thai a home instead of just a home.
You are mute. You are mute, Bhargav.
1 minute. Yeah, probably we are coming to the last questions available in the chat box. There is a question by Snigdhendu Bhattacharya. What are the essential similarities and differences between the Nazi race theory and the RSS race theory? Also, if Professor Habib could elaborate on the difference between taking Aryans as a linguistic group and a race.
Well, the Nazis actually took up the Aryan theory from earlier writers, and they used the swastika. Of course, the openings of the swastika were reversed, but their own symbol, swastika, was also of Indian origin, taken from India. So clearly we could say, if it was whether it is a thing of honor or dishonor, that we also contributed to the Nazi theory of Aryan race, and the swastika is the Aryan symbol. Even the word swastika they took. But otherwise, it was Germany which was the original Aryan home from which they spread out. Well, even at that time, people said that they should not have used the word Aryan because Arya was a word used only in India and Iran, in the Rig Veda and Avesta and the succeeding Sanskrit and Iranian texts. And of course, the word Iran continues till today. So this is an Indo-Iranian idea, the designation, which had nothing to do with Germany. And the swastika too was taken from Iran. There was no swastika earlier in German history.
Geeta had raised her hand in the chat box in the audience. Geeta from South, I think she's a trade union activist. Geeta, you have to raise your question, Geeta.
No, I found the discussion quite interesting. I just want to say just a small comment. I feel that there is no point now trying to say Ambedkar versus some Nehru or versus Gandhi and all that. I feel what is important now is the fact that with this whole thing of Hindu Rashtra and so on, and on the day of assassination of Gandhi, we have to remember that now they are also trying to change the constitution. They want to, remove secularism, socialism, all these things from the preamble. And there is a very strong move in that. So we need to, and we know what happened in the CIA, anti-CIA agitations and so on and so forth. So it is very important that, we need to look at this in a very clear way of moving towards.
You're mute.
Then all the elements are very much there. So we need to, I think, Ambedkar's thing is very, very important. His role, not only on the labor issues, in fact, all these labor codes which they have brought, the government of India has brought, we are all fighting against that and all the trade unions in this country. And it is very similar to the farm laws. So basically to promote the corporate power, they are doing all this, taking away the labor rights and taking away the trade union rights. So that is what we are fighting. And in South, especially Tamil Nadu and Kerala, we are also fighting to save our state laws and the sectoral welfare boards and all that, because they want to take over everything and dominate and completely take away the existing, rights or schemes and so on. So that is the difficulty. For example, for the building construction, they've already taken away all the safety. So they don't mind people falling and dying. That's all. That is the way they are looking at situation. So we need to, I think, bring all the forces together to fight this kind of corporate, corporate fascism or whatever. I mean, I think, I don't know how this can be finally analyzed, but I think the farmers' struggle has shown one way, but the workers are still groping because beyond a few days general strike, they don't have the staying capacity to go on with an indefinite struggle. So that is what we are right now, looking at how, this can be taken forward. And I think this discussion of history should throw more light on the situation and bring certain unity. Unity among the Dalits, the working class, the minorities, Muslims, and the farmers, and so on. Whether this is going to be achieved in this country is a big question. And UP is now the testing ground, it looks. I don't know.
Okay, thank you. Would you like to respond, Professor Irfan Habib?
No, I think it was a comment, and I agree with it, but it has little to do with my theme, that was break of history.
Oh, so we are moving towards the conclusion of this interesting, exciting discussion. Many thought-provoking ideas were shared by Professor Irfan Habib, and we wanted to hear him for quite some time. Many thanks for sparing your time, and many thanks to the audience also for joining the discussion. And if you have not entered your email address, then please enter it, and so that we can invite you for the next session. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you, sir.